muscle, myonuclei, and milk.
Hello everybody, I'm your host, Esmond Schroeder, and welcome back to the second episode of Muscles, Myonuclei, and Milk, the podcast where we talk about everything muscles, myonuclei, and milk while drinking milk. Today's a great day because we have a special guest, Dr. Riley Detrick, who has been extensively researching milk and exclusively how it affects muscle growth. Welcome, Riley.
Thanks, Esmond. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Let's jump right into it. So what research question has your lab been focusing on this past few months?
Yes. So my research question looks at how the fat content in milk affects muscle protein synthesis in young adults post-resistance exercise when matched for losing.
Hold up! We forgot to do the most important thing. Riley, beverages. Why don't you show the camera what we're doing today? What are you drinking?
Today I'll be drinking Kirkland brand A2 organic whole milk.
Wow, organic. You really splurged. Guys, I'm really slacking compared to the last episode. Last episode I got myself some really nice organic whole milk. Today I got the Crafting Kitchen, not even organic, just straight up whole milk. And on top of that, I got really excited for this episode, and I already cracked into this and drank most of this gallon. And so, not working with too much, but we got it. So anyways, back into it, Riley. How about you re-explain your research question for the audience?
Yes, so for my research question, I will be looking at how the milk fat content affects muscle protein synthesis in young adults post-resistance exercise when matched for leucine. I wanted to explore this idea because lots of prior research has only focused on the protein type or the quantity of the protein. But what if the fat content in the milk changes how the amino acids are digested and used by the muscles?
That's fantastic. So why did you choose to study milk specifically?
Milk is widely consumed, affordable, and honestly just delicious. It's packed with essential amino acids, specifically leucine, and leucine on its own has been shown to activate the mTOR pathway. When we look at the mTOR pathway, which is one of the primary regulators of muscle growth, milk hits both the nutrient and hormonal signals. Leucine triggers the mTOR pathway via the RAG ATPases, insulin activates the P13K and the AKT pathway. Together, there is full mTOR activation, and that means more translation, more protein synthesis, and ultimately more muscle growth. Plus, milk contains both whey and casein. Whey is a fast-acting protein, which spikes the leucine levels quickly, which is great for a post-workout. Casein, on the other hand, digests more slowly, forming a gel-like clot in the stomach, releasing amino acids over several hours. On a digestion graph, you can see that whey creates a sharper spike early on, when casein is a more gentle hill that stays elevated for a longer period of time.
That's a great breakdown. So let's talk about your study. What exactly are you aiming to measure?
In my study, I have two aims. The first is to determine if milk fat affects muscle protein synthesis when leucine and protein are matched. I will do this by calculating fractional synthetic rates. And my second aim is to see how milk fat affects amino acid availability and the insulin spike, since both play a key role in recovery. I will measure this via a dual tracer infusion and take frequent blood samples and biopsies to assess the amino acid levels and the insulin spikes.
That sounds like a really complex setup and very rigorous as well. Can you walk us through the study design?
Of course. I'll be using a dual tracer approach for our participants. Begin with a continuous infusion of 3 isotope-labeled amino acids, tyrosine, leucine, and phenylalanine, which will allow us to track the amino acid metabolism and incorporation into new muscle. Prior to any intervention, baseline blood samples and a single biopsy will be taken. At time point 0, participants will perform a bout of resistance exercise to stimulate muscle sensitivity, followed immediately by ingestion of either whole milk or non-fat milk, which has also been intrinsically labeled. Blood samples are taken every 30 minutes post-recovery to assess the amino acid availability and the insulin response, and biopsies will be taken every 2 hours to calculate fractional synthetic rates.
Thanks for that, Riley. Could you go into more depth about the milk that you'll be using in your study?
Yeah, so I'll be using whole milk and non-fat milk matched for leucine content. I've learned from the Katsanos paper that younger individuals need between 1.7 to 2.5 grams of leucine. So in both milk conditions, I've erred on the safer side and matched each condition to contain 2.5 grams of leucine. However, at this leucine concentration, there will be differences in various other factors, such as quantity of milk, calories, fats, protein, and total protein.
Okay, but you also mentioned that milk, there's something else about that milk that makes it really special. So you said something about the tracers that are going to be embedded in that milk. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Okay, this is the part that I think is the coolest thing about this study. So we're not just giving subjects regular milk, we're actually starting all the way back at the source, being the cow. We're going to infuse the cows with labeled amino acids, specifically leucine and phenylalanine. So once these amino acids are circulating in the cow, they get built into the milk proteins, and that milk becomes intrinsically labeled, meaning that every sip contains a trackable amino acid. Now, after collecting that milk, we can manipulate that fat content to be either whole milk or non-fat milk, while keeping that protein and leucine content the exact same with those label tracers.
Wow, that is so cool, dude. Now let's talk more about the logistics of this study. So what about like the participants and their demographics, the exercise protocol that you have them doing after they first consume this milk, or before they consume this milk, and then also the equipment that you're using to analyze those samples?
Yes, so let's start with the participants. We're working with 15 to 18 moderately active adults, both men and women between the ages of 20 and 40 years old. These folks are active, working out at least 3 times a week, but they're not bodybuilders or elite athletes. The idea here is to study real-world exercisers and not the outliers. To be eligible, they need to be in a BMI in a healthy to slightly overweight range, and they can't have any metabolic disorders. So we rule out anyone with lactose intolerance, any recent resistance exercise training history, or anyone already supplementing with protein or creatine, just to keep the playing field level. The exercise protocol was leg extensions, and not just a few sets. We're talking 10 sets of 8 reps at 80% of their 1 rep max, with only 2 minutes of rest in between. The goal is to maximally stimulate the legs to create a strong anabolic environment for muscle to come in and create new muscle. The whole thing should take about 25 minutes, which is pretty manageable, but intense enough to trigger a measurable response for muscle protein synthesis.
And what about that sample collection and analysis?
Of course. So now here comes the high-tech part. We will collect blood samples, muscle biopsies, and run them through some of the most advanced technologies in the field. For the blood samples, we measure amino acid concentrations via tracer enrichment with GCMS and LCMS, and insulin levels using a LISA kit. When it comes to muscle biopsies, we focus on analyzing the protein-bound tracer incorporation using GCMS. All of this allows us to calculate fractional synthetic rates and exactly how much dietary protein, specifically the milk protein, with different fat contents, and how much is being utilized in the body.
All right, so now let's dive in a little bit into your first research aim. So you're looking at how different types of milk affect muscle protein synthesis after exercise, which I think is super interesting because when I think about this, I think just that maybe there's more leucine in the skim milk because they've cut off some of that fat. But you're saying that the fat itself might also play a role in this if the leucine levels were matched. So what are you expecting to find with this first aim?
Great question. So for aim number 1, I focused on comparing the fractional synthetic rates between whole milk and skim milk. And what it predicts is the skim milk will trigger a sharper and more immense rise in protein synthesis after ingestion, but that spike will taper off more quickly. On the other hand, whole milk will produce a slower, more gradual increase in fractional synthetic rates, but that elevation will last longer.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about the amount of protein that's in it.
Exactly. Both milks are matched for protein and leucine content, but the real difference lies in the digestion kinetics. One of the key players here is casein, one of the major proteins found in milk. Casein is known for being slowly digested, and it forms like gel-like clot in the stomach, especially when the fat is present. That physical change slows down how quickly amino acids get absorbed into the bloodstream.
So that fat really is playing a role too in this whole digestion and incorporation exchange that you're looking into.
Totally. Fat triggers the release of the hormone cholecystokinin, or CCK, which slows gastric emptying. So with whole milk, you've got this dual action effect where the casein is slowing digestion mechanically, and the fat is slowing it down hormonally.
Wow.
Together, they lead to this prolonged release of amino acids into the blood, which keeps the muscle protein synthesis effect elevated for longer, even if the peak isn't as high as what you'd see in the non-fat milk.
And so what about skim milk, right? Or this non-fat milk? It still has casein in it, even though you're taking out that fat?
It does, but without the fat, the CCK response is much weaker. This means that the gastric emptying isn't slowed down as much. So even though the casein is still doing its thing, the overall effect is faster digestion, quicker amino acid absorption, and a shorter spike in muscle protein synthesis.
And so you're saying that the biggest takeaway is that casein digestion is always slowly incorporated into the blood, but this fat in the whole milk amplifies and extends that effect even more?
Exactly. The bottom line is casein sets the stage for slower digestion, and fat just stretches that timeline even more. So that's why I expect to see those differences in fractional synthetic rate patterns between whole and skim milk, even though the protein content is the exact same.
Nice. Okay, let's move on to aim 2. You're looking at amino acid availability and insulin response. So what's going on there?
I expect skim milk to cause a much quicker, sharper rise in plasma amino acid levels. That's the orange line in the bottom left over here. That's because skim milk empties from the stomach faster, so amino acids reach the bloodstream quicker. But that spike is more short-lived. In contrast with whole milk, I expect a slower, more gradual rise in amino acids, but that will be sustained over a longer period of time.
Same reasons as before, as we discussed with aim 1?
Exactly. It's the same mechanisms we talked about for fractional synthetic rates.
And insulin response is what follows the same trend?
That's what I'm predicting. Skim milk, with its fast amino acid absorption and slightly higher carbohydrate content, will create a quicker and sharper spike in insulin, with whole milk being a more delayed digestion and overall absorption. There might be a more moderate and delayed spike in the insulin response. However, both should be sufficient enough to generate a response for muscle protein synthesis.
So what you're really zooming in on with this second aim is about the timing, not just the total amounts.
Exactly. It's not just about how much leucine or protein you consume, it's about how your body processes it. And fat can shift that curve entirely, not by changing what's in the milk, but by changing when it shows up in your bloodstream. That timing can matter a lot depending on whether you're trying to spike recovery right away or sustain it over a longer period of time.
Okay, so now let's talk about some applications so that our viewers can maybe try to apply your research into their own daily lives. So who stands to benefit the most from these differences between these different types of milk?
That's a great question. Let's start with athletes and the younger population. These individuals often need a rapid and sustained amino acid delivery. After a hard workout or competition, the body is craving nutrients to repair all those broken muscles. I could see both skim and whole milk being ideal for younger athletes. Skim milk will digest faster, spiking amino acid availability and insulin sooner. This could be helpful for athletes to recover more quickly, especially when they're working out multiple times a day. Additionally, whole milk will do the same, but it'll have more calories, allowing athletes to keep their energy demands higher.
That makes sense. So what about the other end of the spectrum, not these young athletes, but what about older adults?
Yeah, for older adults, the whole story changes. They're dealing with something called anabolic resistance, where their muscles just don't respond to protein as effectively as when they were younger. This is where a sustained amino acid delivery is very important. Whole milk with its extended amino acid release might be a better match. It keeps those muscle building signals going longer, which can overcome that anabolic resistance and support daily muscle growth.
So when you say anabolic resistance, you're talking about sarcopenia and trying to combat that?
Exactly. Sarcopenia is age-related muscle loss, and it's a huge issue for the aging populations. This image shows how muscle mass can decline over time, especially with inactivity or chronic disease. But resistance training and pairing it with slow digesting proteins like that in whole milk can preserve or even rebuild the muscle that has been lost.
So it sounds like it's really about the timing of this nutrient delivery, something that we usually don't really think about, and how that's really important, especially on who you're feeding in these aging populations that might have more of an anabolic resistance.
100%. It's not just about how much protein or leucine you're getting, it's about when your body absorbs it and how your body uses it. Fat absorption may suit athletes, while a more prolonged delivery may support the aging populations. Understanding that difference is what makes this kind of research so valuable.
Wow. Thank you so much, Riley. I really look forward to hearing more about this study, and thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. So, without further ado, to end this podcast, Riley, it's time for the milk jug. So, I'll do this one. Here you go. All right.
Cheers.
Cheers, and thank you.
Muscle, myonuclei, and milk.